So another project for the day. I've previously done a video on my attempts to fabricate a key from scratch to fit this old piece of industrial automation equipment in the programmer's run program load mode select switch. And I have apparently one of the relatively few remaining original keys, and I was trying to make a few more. Took a stab at milling down material, sort of the subtractive approach to making the key with the ridge, and I thought, well, that's a lot of work. I wonder if it would be easier to make it with the additive approach, starting with just part of it and then adding on material. And using my micrometer on the original key, the actual thickness of the key is 0.048 inches thick. With the ridge that's along the top of it here, it comes to 0.064 inches. And you subtract that out, and that means the ridge itself is 0.016 inches higher above the base part of the key. Never mind the slot which gets cut in there yet. So as it turns out, I can buy 0.05 brass sheet, which is just a hair more than 0.048, and I can also buy quite easily at the hardware store 0.016 inch in various sizes to make this ridge along there. So I thought I would cut out a key to the approximate proper dimensions from the 0.05, and then braze or solder or something a little key strip of the thin material, and that should be strong enough for what it needs to do, which is really just alignment. It shouldn't be under any other stress. And then all I have to do is cut out the shapes with my key cutter, and that might be quicker and easier, and I'd probably get a better finish since I'm not milling down from thicker material. So I'm going to give that a try. So from the 0.05 inch sheet, I've got a couple of outlines made up which are a bit bigger than the key needs to be. And I don't have anything that'll shear this, so my only real recourse is to use the metal cutting bandsaw to kind of hog it out a little bit. Okay, here are those two pieces now. And I've measured the width of the ridge to be 0.066 inches, and that again is the width. So I'm going to see about cutting that out of the thinner brass now. And with my micrometer set to 0.066, I'm using the tips of the micrometer to score a cutting line along the edge of this brass sheet. Alright, so I've got my shear brake roller here, and I'm going to see. Alright, I believe I've got it aligned here and squared up. So let's see what happens here. I think I want to increase the lever arm. And I end up with this nice little strip of brass, which when measured ends up being 0.065. So that came out pretty good. It has a very slight twist to it, but it's pretty flat, which is good. Once I cut it into like 1 inch lengths, that twist will be insignificant. And the ridge is about 5/8 of an inch long, so I'm going to cut them to that length. And I'm just going to use my regular tin snips to cut those. And so now I've got the little ridge pieces. So I've got some spring tweezers clamping the strips in place on both work pieces. And for this I think I'm just going to use some good old tin lead solder, 6040, stuff I'd use for electronics work. I've got some pure lead solder that's good for ducting and things like that, but I think it's going to be too soft. I want the higher tin content that the 6040 tin lead gives me. And I'm just going to use my flexible hosed propane torch to heat up the metal and see if I can get a decent solder joint there. Alright, I've quenched it. I moved the clips around to try to wipe away the excess solder, make for a cleaner joint. And the clips are always in the way, so I kept moving them to opposite sides. The plate kept it warm enough that it was still, the solder was still molten for quite a while. And let's see if I can get this to focus. About like that. I mean, it looks like there's a big blob of solder there, but that's really just a thin, very thin layer. I'm going to check and see how strong it is now. Well, it seems like it's on there. I can't push it off with the steel ruler. So I guess that's okay. I'm going to do a little scraping. Probably with my, is this still hot? Not really. I'm going to do a little scraping with the edge of a razor blade. One of these guys. Right along the edge. So it's on there. And I've removed most of the excess solder. I can buff away the rest of it. And here's the other one. Okay, what I'm finding here is that that ridge makes a good alignment tool for the slot on the back of the master key. I can feel it slot in there and it won't budge anymore, so it's just about perfect for that. And now I've got the outlines of the key body drawn on here, and I'm going to cut these lines here. They'll form a left alignment or an edge alignment for the key cutting machine, and the slot or the ridge itself will form the alignment in this direction. Something else I didn't do the last time I made these keys, I wasn't really successful in using the scroll saw to cut out the shapes, and I was doing it mostly with the grinder. And I bought a couple of these skip tooth scroll saw blades that are for thin materials, and they're also rated by the manufacturer for cutting soft metals. And it should work okay on brass. We'll find out. I can't really use the hold down because the pieces are smaller than that, so I'm gonna try to do it just freehand. Not sure how well that's gonna work. Let's see. Well, that cut it pretty much like a hot knife through butter. Nice clean cut. It's sort of like a jeweler's saw. It's getting a little warm, so I have to take a moment to let it cool off. The trick to these things is not letting the workpiece rise off the table, because if it does, the blade will catch it and pull it up and fling it every which way. So I did break the blade there, but luckily I've got a whole bunch of them. And even though the Olson website lists these blades as being jeweler's blades and good for cutting, you know, relatively thin and softer metals, there's nothing on the packaging that says these are any good for metal at all. It says for plastics and wood and fibrous materials. I presume they mean things like fiberglass and so on. And I suspect one reason why I was having so much trouble with the blade towards the end, it was cutting really nice at the beginning, but then it was getting worse and worse, and I think that's just because it was getting dull already. These blades probably aren't really all that good for cutting metal. But I've got a fresh blade on there now, so let's see what it does. Yeah, it's cutting really nice again. So I think it's one of those things where I may only get about one key out of each blade if I continue to use these blades. Oh darn it. I don't imagine it's going to be any better starting it that way. I think it's better to take it in while it's moving. Yeah, it's already getting dull. I can feel it's a lot harder to make it cut, and it's getting noisier and jumpier, so I think the teeth are already getting dull. Anyway, I did manage to make the cuts that way. I ended up going in at a bit of an angle. Couldn't even hardly see I was doing that at the time. Seemed like they were straight, but the blade doesn't have much rigidity, and it kept wanting to wander even under tension. So again, not the greatest solution to this cutting situation. So I'm going to rough cut the keys out the rest of the way using my metal cutting bandsaw. But the problem with working with little pieces like this is that the blade is, you know, kind of grabby. It's hard to hold on to the small pieces, and it tends to flip them and pull them down into the rollers and jam everything up and make a mess and potentially cause an injury. So I have this sort of a zero tolerance plate I just made from some sheet tin, you know, from the hardware store, and cut a slot in it that'll go in like this and lay on top of the original table and just be clamped on at the corners with some little spring clips, hold it in place. So that was so much quicker and easier and probably safer than trying to use the scroll saw. And once again, roughed out key shape. Well, I let the key slip a little bit in the vise, and it took off a bit more than it should right here. The rest of the shape is pretty good. I've hit it with the wire brush a little bit. I haven't sanded the outer shape yet, but I just want to see if it fits into the lock, or if this key is toast. Oh, it's not going to go in yet because I haven't cut the slot in the back, I'll bet. Yeah, I need to do that still. And I've marked the general outline of the slot. I think it is straight there, but I didn't quite draw the left line straight to the mark, so it makes it slant over a bit more than it should. I'll have to keep that in mind when I'm grinding it out with the Dremel cutoff wheel. So I've cut the slot in here rather crudely, I have to admit. I was doing it by hand and it went a little wide, but that doesn't really matter. It only needs to clear the slight nub on here. It'd be nice if it was neater, but it does what it needs to do. Maybe I'll make a neater job on the second key. Alright, so I just need to, where's the camera here? It's basically cut out, but there's the one straight edge in here that the angled cutter doesn't want to cut, so I always have to take that off just a tiny little bit with the cutoff wheel on the Dremel tool. Alright, well, this is a little kludgy. The alignment wasn't quite right on the second key, and this notch here that I'm pointing to with my thumbnail was too far back, resulting in the key going too far into the lock, and therefore the other parts weren't lining up quite right. I didn't really feel like making a whole new key for what these are going to be used for, so I just took a little piece of brass and clipped it on there and repeated my soldering it on to the side of the key right next to the ridge piece, and thereby bringing it down to where it needs to be. And now it does work. So I've got two usable keys here, and I'm still going to profile this one a little bit more. I never did that the first time around. Alright, now that I've done a little buffing on these, I'm just going to hit them with the old degreaser. Try to clean them up a little bit. Even with this, you don't always manage to get every little bit of it. Alright, that was just some simple green I used there. And now I'm going to do a secondary touch-up with just some isopropyl alcohol. And now I've got my nickel plating set up here with one of the keys hanging from as one electrode suspended in the solution, and the other electrode in there. I just need to plug the power supply in. Not seeing a lot of bubbling activity there, which concerns me. I think we're getting something now. Alright, the key's been nickel plated now. It needs to be buffed up a bit, try to get a nicer finish on it. It's a little smutty. I don't think I had the distance from the electrode quite right. Well, that doesn't seem to be helping very much. I wonder if I might just very lightly touch it with the wire brush. That might do a better job. Or maybe it'll just totally mess it up. It's going to be a really thin layer of nickel on there, so I am kind of leery about doing this. Yeah, there's not much helping that, unfortunately. I just got a bad plating job. It's not, I mean, it's got the plating on it, but it's such a mottled plating that I don't really dare do much else to it. I can try to degrease it again a little bit. See if that helps at all. Well, it's ugly. That's all there is to say about it. I don't know what went wrong with this plating batch. Part of it is that I didn't have the key all that well buffed to start with, and that always makes for uneven plating. But it's clearly got nickel on it. It's not just raw brass anymore. So here's one key. It plated a lot better on the part with all the machining, and the part that was smooth, it ended up with a real kind of dark, smutty look to it. It's clearly nickel plated, but it's just a very uneven, rough, blemished plating job. And here's the other key. Again, you can see there's the nickel on it, but it's just not a very attractive key. And the final verification that everything is still good with these. So, one thing that has occurred to me here, I don't really know the metallurgy on this, is I do have this tin lead material soldering the strip on here, and I don't know if that could any way sour the plating process. It doesn't seem like enough of it would be exposed to do anything, and the metal is moving in the direction of this. Still, I suppose it might have caused some problem. But structurally, it worked out great. It was a lot less work to make them this way than it was the other way. And the keys are definitely usable. and I think they do look a little better with the nickel on it than they do with the raw brass. Still, they're kind of a mess. Anyway, hopefully you found this interesting one way or another.